Shalom. Welcome to the Zionist Education Initiative, where we get to discuss all about Zionism, different Zionist ideas, Zionist figures, and all of the values that we hold so dear and really propel this movement forward. So today we are going to be discussing Achad Ha'am and cultural Zionism, what Achad Ha'am brought to the world, and one of Israel's really greatest exports, and what they are most known for. So let's dive right in. First and foremost, who was the leader of this movement? It was Achad Ha'am, who was originally known as Asher Tzvi Hirsch Ginsburg. He lived in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and went to Cheder, had Hasidic parents, had a pretty religious upbringing, as many other great Zionist leaders did as well. And he was also, again, very, very learned. If you go throughout most of the Zionist figures, they all had a tremendous sense of education, were educated in some either great places or supplemented that learning, as we saw with Golda Meir, who ran away from home just so she should be able to get an education. So he was also very, very well educated and became a good writer, was constantly publishing in the papers. And he visited Eretz Yisrael. He visited the land of Israel in 1908 and moved to London to actually manage the Wysotsky Tea Company, which is still around today. But he ended up moving to Tel Aviv later in his life. And he had very strong feelings about Zionism, but not what was well known or what Theodor Herzl was really talking about, as we'll get into a little bit later in today's session. But we'll discuss this idea of starting cultural Zionism. So cultural Zionism was really a movement to be able to solve the Jewish problem, not so much in the most practical way of creating this Jewish homeland that Herzl wanted to create, this safe haven for Jews to go to, but also for Jews to really return to their center, to be able to return to their identity that they've been able to hold on to, their culture for so long. So just this quote from Achad Ha'am in the late 1800s says, "The Eastern form of the spiritual problem is an absolutely different from the Western. In the West, it is the problem of the Jew. In the East, it is the problem of Judaism. Judaism seeks to return to its historic center, where it will be able to live a life of developing in a natural way, to bring its powers into play in every department of human culture, and thus to contribute to the common stock of humanity, a great national culture." So what Achad Ha'am is really saying here is that what we need now is to restore ourselves to this culture that's kind of diminished away. And we'll see a little bit later on what he's talking about, but to give it over in a nutshell is that the world is very much changing, and that there are so many in the late 1800s. Certainly you see the effects of the Enlightenment period, and you see people kind of going away from what Jews have been practicing for centuries, from generation to generation. So now he's saying we need to really create a place where Jews can reconnect to who they really are, not in any artificial way, he says in a natural way, but really to be able to take pride in this culture that we've lost, and ultimately it will be a source of inspiration for the rest of the world. He's speaking to not just for Jews, but rather this cultural Zionism will be very much or lagoyim, a light unto the nations, and everybody will be able to benefit from it. We see that today with this idea that people are very fond of quoting as Israel as this startup nation, as this place that is just full of innovation. And this is an excerpt from the book Startup Nation, actually. And it goes through, we're not going to read the whole thing, but it goes through just a variety of examples in which the world's technology leadership, the heads of major institutions, organizations, and companies like Microsoft, like Google, like Warren Buffett, like Cisco, like all these places and people who their presidents, vice presidents, and major stakeholders will say that Israel is one of the few places in the world where they can acquire so much amazing ingenuity, so much innovation, technology, and you see that all over. You see that in this piece. You just a few things that I bolded here. That it is important for major technology companies. It is impossible for major technology companies to ignore Israel, and most haven't. Almost half the world's top technology companies have bought startups or open research and development centers in Israel. A true testament to what Achad Ha'am was talking about, saying that we should develop our own form, develop a culture in which everybody can learn from. And he discusses this as an idea of Israel being in the center of a circle. If you were to draw a circle and put Israel in the center, he kind of refers to it as like spikes going back and forth, so that Israel is the center, and that as much as we will gain from the world around us, the spikes actually go both ways, and that people will be able, that Israel will be exporting its knowledge, it'll be exporting its culture, and you see that in our innovation, in our strategy. Just as a side point, a big point that I'm very fond of bringing up is that Sigmund Freud discusses the innovation of the Jewish people and the idea of their ingenuity, because he actually attributes it to God, saying once you have a people that believe in such an abstract view of a God, of a divine being, then no one in the world can tell them something's impossible. Once you know that God exists, once you have this strong belief system, then somebody telling you that you can't do something seems a little bit out of the box, because God kind of instilled in you the ability to change the world. So just and that's very much what Ahad Ha'am is talking about. I also just like this last line. It's bolded on the page, but it says, as an NBC Universal vice president sent to scout for Israeli digital media companies, wondered, why is all this happening in Israel? I've never seen so much chaos and so much innovation all in the same place. And that's really what we're talking about as far as culture, is building a tremendous hub for everybody to be able to learn from. And that's very much what Ahad Ha'am had in mind. If you want to look at it from more Judaic sources, this idea of Israel always being at the center of the circle, the Talmud Sanhedrin in the oral tradition that is now written down says, and you shall ascend, talking about the Beit HaMikdash, talking about the Holy Temple, that and it's teaching that the Holy Temple is higher than any other points in all the land, and even more so if the Holy Temple is higher than all points in the land, then even more so the land is higher than all other lands. So just this idea of Israel is a model that people should look to and learn from, and that we should always have our hearts gazing towards. Another Talmud section, another excerpt that says, if one is standing outside the land of Israel, he should always direct his heart towards the land of Israel. So really framing this idea. And while Ahad Ha'am initially wasn't necessarily talking about the place, but rather the idea, he ends up coming around and discussing this idea of we should have this place that everybody looks to, that Jews and non-Jews alike. So now we get into a little bit more of the contentious parts of Ahad Ha'am's tenure as a Zionist leader, and we see a tremendous disagreement he has with Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl, who now we can say in the 21st century was a tremendous leader in the modern Zionist movement, that he really is the founder of modern Zionism, primarily with his creation of the World Zionist Congress. But Ahad Ha'am goes to these congresses and is unimpressed. He really thinks that Theodor Herzl is off the mark as far as what the Jewish people need. Theodor Herzl really thinking that the Jews just need a safe haven. They need a place they can go that will be their own. Which is why he recommended other places like Argentina, like Uganda, the Uganda scheme, a variety of other options before he ended up coming to the land of Israel. But Ahad Ha'am sees these Zionist congresses and says this isn't what we should be doing. And just you can read these excerpts saying, this historic right of Jews does not cancel out the right of the rest of the land's residents, who press their claims by virtue of working and residing in the land for generations. This land is presently their national home as well. All residents of the area must work together, and the overall leadership must be agreed upon for the benefit of all. So he's saying that one major component he's taking into consideration is the other people already living in the land, that we shouldn't just place ourselves there and rule over others. It's a big question as to Zionism's view on ruling over others, because it was always the Jews who were not ruling over themselves. That's why what's so special about Israel is the self-determination that we have accomplished here. So that's point one that he brings up, and he says there is no way in which an ancient people that has been a light unto the nations can, in recompense for all of its tribulations, make do with such a bare minimum. So he's also saying that Theodor Herzl is really setting the bar too low. Realistically, that this great nation, the Jewish people, who have been all over the world, they've suffered tremendous amount of hardship and continue to thrive or at least survive at the very least, but still be a model nation as far as their culture, as far as what they bring to the world. There's no way you can just set the bar as saying we having a land as that being enough. rather there needs to be so much more. So he ends up writing editorials, and it's really, really one of his strengths as a writer, and you can still read Ahad Ha'am's writings today, and they're still very popular. But he says to listen, he's writing this in Hamelitz editorial, which is a local paper, and he's saying to listen to Herzl's advocates, one would think that a genius had suddenly discovered that the Jewish people was still alive without knowing it and needed to be informed of the fact and of there being a land called Israel in which it might be rejuvenated. So he's really saying, like, who is this guy Herzl to be able to say we should be in our ancestral homeland? Of course, it's our land. Of course, that Jews all over the world have a tie to this. He's really not bringing anything new to the table, and he's not moving the cause forward. But he does end up qualifying just this one excerpt from Yosef Klausner saying we can oppose Herzl's approach and are obliged to, as every lover of Zion who attends the Basel Congress is free to do, if we think it will harm the steady growth of Jewish settlements in Palestine. It may be that Herzl's political diplomatic Zionism is dangerous and that the Jewish people must be warned of this, but to laugh, one doesn't dismiss ideas like Herzl's with witticisms. So he's saying, like, look, as much as we can say we disagree with Herzl's approach here, we can't be dismissive of it. We can't think that this is going nowhere. Rather, we should take it seriously, and we should really see where this road leads, and how we play a role. Because Ahad Ha'am very much disagree with Herzl, and it happens to be Herzl's. A lot of Herzl's followers ended up writing op-eds back, calling out Ahad Ha'am, even questioning his Zionism. So you see this significant contention that's taking place. The conversation continues, and it says, in an early essay written in 1889, this is not the way. He argued against the idea of Palestine as a destination for the Jewish masses. Not to say that Jews shouldn't go there, first and foremost, but this is just an article by Mosaic discussing Ahad Ha'am and the difference of Herzl. So it says, the love of Zion movement, he maintained, had erred by calling for speedy, large-scale settlements in the land of Israel, hoping to compete with America for the swelling wave of Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe. It had made unrealistic promises of profitable homesteads in new agricultural colonies, lucrative businesses opportunities, thriving Jewish villages in which to raise one's family, and so on. That could lead only to disillusionment and re-emigration. Zionism, the essay maintained, would not succeed by appealing to the lowest common denominators of human motivation. Only by invoking an idealism dedicated to national revival rather than personal benefit could attract settlers capable of withstanding the difficulties of Palestinian life. And here's where I think the main point is the numbers might be small, but they would be a base that could be built on. So really what he's saying, while Theodor Herzl and so many in the Zionist movements are saying we need everybody to get out of Europe, Europe is really going by the wayside, and we see later on what resulted in the Holocaust that they were absolutely right. But he's pushing for mass immigration and promising a great life. We're going to settle Israel. We're going to be prosperous. It's going to be good for all of us. But overall, Ahad Ha'am is saying that it's not going to be everything it's cracked out to be. As we saw with the many aliyot, the people who moved to Israel, they had to drain the swamps from malaria. A lot of them did not do well. It is not the Israel of today. People were not necessarily prosperous. There were a lot of challenges that were going on in the land, and certain feuding that happened throughout history. So Ahad Ha'am was actually correct in saying that this wouldn't be the easiest journey. And then what you're going to expect is that people are going to go back. That if people don't have an easy transition, and we see that in Aliyah even today, if people do not have an easy transition into Israeli society and coming and making Aliyah, then they're likely going to go back. So really what we need to do is be honest and appeal to people's ideological perspective, saying that this is where they should be. And even though it might not be glamorous, and it likely won't be glamorous, it's really the right move for you. And he's saying, even though that group of people might be small, at least you're starting with a very strong foundation. And that's really what we need. We don't need this mass immigration. So as we are just about out of time, just two fundamental points I'd like to bring up about Ahad Ha'am and cultural Zionism. The first is that the Jews have passed through a stage of becoming or growth in which scattered elements are welded together into a single social body around certain central figures by means of self-effacing imitation. So what does that all mean? In essence, the Jews have gone through a lot. They've been displaced. They're constantly being moved around and suffering hardship. So now we need to come back together. We need to kind of weld together as one single social body. And he's talking about this culture that we have as Jews. Obviously, not everyone is the same, but rather that we are all connected, and to maintain that. And lastly, he says I found this point so poignant and such a such a tremendous tribute to what Achad Ha'am was all about, saying while the Jews and their culture flourished for centuries under the oppressive conditions of diaspora, their encounter with secular modernity has shaken their religious faith and is depriving them of their raison d'être. They will not be able to maintain their own culture and survive as a distinct people unless they develop new foundations for their existence. These can only be supplied by the construction of a spiritual center in their ancestral lands, where a renovated Jewish culture can obtain a base of operations in a Hebrew-speaking society that will radiate its salutary influence throughout the Jewish world. So last point, but really a couple of things that Jews should really return to Israel, a land that holds their values so dear. They need to strengthen their values. It used to be that because secular culture wasn't so prevalent and that religious culture was very strong, it wasn't as much of a problem. But with the Enlightenment period, with this secular modernity that's taking over in the streets, that Jews are beginning to lose themselves. So they need a place that they can go to remind themselves how special that they are, how they have a unique homeland and a unique culture that they should be proud of. And he really took issue with the fact that Theodor Herzl was not taking that into consideration as part of his plan. And he very much believed in the speaking of Hebrew, that if we maintain a language, then it'll be a tremendous win for the Jewish people, and it'll only contribute to our ability to strengthen ourselves and our own identities and be a light unto the world. So that is Cultural Zionism. Thank you for joining us here at the Nefesh B'Nefesh Zionist Education Initiative, where we will continue to have the conversation of Zionism. Looking forward to joining you next week.